Hi guys, okay, so open Photoshop and open your newly created out.uv.tiff image in Photoshop. First thing I want you to do is duplicate the layer because you'll find that the TIFF image is locked into the background layer. I like to just duplicate it, so I'm going to call this my UV map and then just delete the original background layer. Alright, next we're going to create a selection layer. So basically we're just going to block out some flat middle grey colour so that when we come back and we need to select an area we can do it with one click. So in the layers panel down the very bottom there's a little square. It's the second icon from the right. Click it and make a new layer. I'm going to call it the blocking or blockout layer. So normally I'd use the magic wand tool generally to block out. Because this is almost all rectangles, I can get away with using the rectangle tool. So I'm just going to select these areas, hold shift and add to the selection with the rectangle. I'm going to go through and fill all these areas with that middle grey. So just check your foreground colour on your tool palette. Make sure you've got 128, 128, 128 grey. And in that layer, just drop that grey into all your selections. So I'm just going to quickly go through this. Make sure your paint bucket tool is, when selected, it's actually set to opacity 100% for this. So I've done everything bar the paper layer, and I'm just going to zoom in here and I'm going to do that with the magic wand, just for demonstration purposes. So you'll notice I'm actually going over the lines. And this is because the UV space exists from line to line, which means I can overshoot it. What I can't do is undershoot. Just fill that. Okay, great. So now we've got a blockout layer ready to go. So I'm just going to leave that, hide it, and work on the actual color map. So if you go into your source folder in your source images folder in your project folder, there's another source images folder that I created, and it's got some photos I took of a book. So just go open and navigate to the folder. UV for Photoshop editing, and open all 4 images. So just go back to your map file. I'm going to create a few new layers. So we'll start with the front layer, so just name them. And once you've created and named your 4 layers, just go through and add one more layer and drag it to the back, and we're going to call that our new background layer. And just dump a total flat black paint bucket into that layer. I'm just going to drag that to the very back so I can still see my UV lines. So I'm going to start by texture the front using the rectangle tool. I'm going to select the area I need, hit Control C to copy, move back to my file, make sure I'm in the right layer, so select your front layer, Control V to paste, and I'm going to use Control T to scale that layer down to match my UVs. Now the first problem I've got here is that my UVs are actually behind my imagery, which makes it very difficult to work. So I'm just going to roughly put that in place, and then I'm going to apply a fix for that. So hitting enter. Okay, so grab your UV map layer, drag it to the very top of your layers window, and change the blending mode to screen, and then it'll sit over the top of all your imagery like a screen. So I'm just going to go and edit my front layer just a little bit more. Control T to transform size and hit enter. And I'm going to go through and drop the rear, the spine and the paper into their respective layers. Again, just using the copy and paste. So selecting with a marquee, rectangle tool, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and Control T to resize and position. So I've done the jacket. I'm just going to do the paper. I've just moved some layers around. I actually forgot to create the paper layer. And the reason why we create so much separation is so we can come back and make small edits to everything when we need to. I'm just going to place that. So now I've got my colour map pretty much in place. I've still got to do those edges. Because they're never going to be very close to the camera, I can get away with just dumping a paint bucket in them. So this is where the block out layer comes in handy. So first thing I'm going to do is make my foreground colour an appropriate yellow for the book edges. So I'm just going to select my marquee tool, my eyedropper tool. Pick a yellow that is a kind of middle ground and can apply to the whole edge of the book. Might go a bit lighter. Yep. And then go into my blocking layer and use the magic wand tool to select and shift select only the edge parts of the book. Now I'm going to go to my edge layer, hide my blocking layer, and use the paint bucket to just drop that yellow in. So this is the final colour map ready to go. So make sure you've saved it as a PSD so that you can retain your layers and do further editing. So I'm going to call that, I'm going to call it colour file, and I'm going to put PSD in the title before the extension so I always know what it is. I'm just going to save that to the desktop. The next thing I want to do is create a bump map, and I only want the bump map applied to the sound system engineering text that's in the front of my colour map. So I'm going to resave this PSD file, and I'll save it out as a bump map. So I'm going to call it bump.psd, save it on the desktop with all my alpha layers, everything intact. Then I'm going to go and hide the things I'm not going to be using. So I'm not going to be using the edges of the book in the bump, the paper, the rear, the spine. Won't be using the block out, just the front. Also, because this is a bump map, what I need is a middle grey value to tell Maya to apply no bump to the rest of the image. So I'm just going to go and change my foreground colour again to that 128 value grey. And with the paint bucket, I'm going to drop that over the background layer. The next thing is I don't need most of this sound system front cover image. So I'm going to go into the front layer and I'm going to delete everything I'm not using for the bump. I've decided I'm going to make the bump stick out. So this is going to be a white value, not a black value. Now, you could go and delete all that black. Fortunately for us, because we're just using a lighter colour value and we're not worried about colour, just black and white, we can use a blend mode to drop all that black out. So if you've got the layer selected, go to your blend modes, change the blend mode to lighten. Now I've just got the text sitting in front of my middle grey value. I'm going to apply one more thing to this layer. I'm just going to give it a really soft blur. So I'm going to go Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and at the moment it's at 1.7 pixels. I'm going to bring that down to an even 1 pixel blur. Hit OK. I'm just going to resave my file. So this file's a complete bump map. Now I'm ready to output the actual image file that'll be attached to the object. So I'm just going to go Save As, change my format to TIFF, change my title to bump map, drop my alpha and my layers, and save it to the desktop. I've got a few on the desktop, so I'm just going to put a number in front of it so I can identify it easily. And that's saved. Now I'm going to go back and open my colour map. I'm going to do the same thing from here. I'm going to output a TIFF file to attach to the object. I'm going to call it O1 color file. I'm going to dump my alpha and my layers and click OK. So now you've got two files outputted ready to put on your material to build into your shader. You can then use the blockout layer and all the layers that you've retained in your PSD files to create other maps, like specular maps, reflection maps, transparency, incandescence, and so on. So we've just switched to Maya, and we've got this scene file, and there's the book geo in the scene. So I'm just going to actually give it its own unique material. So I'm going to give it a blend to give it a bit of shininess. I'm going to call it book MAT for material. I'm going to start dropping the colors in channels. So make sure you've got shaders turned on in your viewport. Switch your render at a high quality so you can see your bump map, and go to the attribute editor and click the checkerboard. You're in the color channel, so you want to file and you want to load the file path. So O1 colorfile.tiff, open, and there you go, fully textured book with the image map applied. So I'm just going to go that one step further and now add the bump map. So I'm moving back to my material. I'm going to go to bump mapping. Again, I want to file. And I'm going to drop the bump depth to 0.5 because I already know that 1.0 is probably going to be too high a value for this. And in my bump value, hit the arrow, and then you can drop a file in your bump value. So we'll go O1 bump map. And now the text on the front of the book actually sticks out. So we'll just do a quick test render. So that's a little mental ray test render. I'm going to take this one step further. While we're in here, I'm just going to create a little bit of a lighting setup for this book. Okay, so I've just created a little 3-point lighting setup and made sure my area lights have a decay rate, and I've set them to linear just to try and get this looking a little bit nicer. So I'm just going to hit render on that. So this is my final textured book with a bump map and a color map applied, rendered in Mental Ray. So I'm going to save out that image. I'm going to choose a PSD layered. I'm going to save it on my desktop as book PSD layered, just so I can find it. I'm just going to show you a trick while using the file save PSD layered. So I'm just opening Photoshop again. I'm going to open that file. And you'll see that because I chose a PSD layered, I've actually got an alpha channel in that layer. So I'm going to create a new layer here, and I'm going to drag that new layer behind my render. And I'm just going to open something I downloaded off the web for demonstration purposes. This is just a star field. And I'm just going to paste it behind. So you can take advantage of that alpha straight away without having to set the boundaries. Basically, if there's no geometry, it'll be transparencyed out.